The roadside diner sat at the edge of a two-lane highway, its neon sign buzzing faintly against the purple glow of evening. It was the kind of place truckers knew well: cheap coffee, greasy food, and silence broken only by the clatter of cutlery and the hum of a jukebox in the corner. On this night, the air inside was calm, the conversations low, until the door creaked open and someone new rolled in. A woman stepped inside, her posture sharp and upright, though she wore plain jeans and a leather jacket instead of a uniform. Her hair was cropped short, neat but unfussy, and a faint scar ran just above her left eyebrow. She walked with steady confidence, the kind of stride that drew quiet glances from the few regulars at the counter. She didn't smile or nod at anyone, but she wasn't unfriendly either. She simply carried herself with the kind of quiet self-assurance that came from years of standing where others had fallen. To most people in the diner, she looked like just another traveler stopping for a hot meal on the road. Nobody knew yet that she was a Navy commander, one who had seen battles that would make hardened men tremble. She chose a booth by the window and ordered nothing more than a coffee and a plate of eggs. The waitress, a kind-eyed woman with tired hands, brought it over with a smile. "Long day?" she asked softly. "Long life," the woman replied, her voice calm, even, and firm. The waitress chuckled, not sure what she meant, then returned to the counter. For a moment, the diner settled back into its quiet rhythm. But then the calm shattered. The rumble of engines came first, low and growling, shaking the window glass. A second later, the roar of exhaust pipes split the air. Outside, two motorcycles screeched to a halt, their chrome catching the glow of the neon lights. The door banged open and in swaggered two bikers, leather vests patched with emblems, boots clanging hard on the linoleum. They brought noise with them, loud voices, the smell of smoke, and the kind of arrogance that filled every corner of the room. They were the type used to walking into places like this and claiming them as their own. The regulars dropped their gazes to their plates. The waitress sighed. Trouble had arrived. The bikers spotted her almost immediately, the lone woman at the booth sitting tall but quiet, her eyes steady on her coffee. One of them smirked, elbowing the other. "Well, look what we got here," he muttered. They stomped toward her booth, their boots echoing. One leaned against the table, close enough that his shadow fell across her food. "Hey there, sweetheart. What's a lady like you doing eating all by herself?" She didn't look up. She cut into her eggs, lifted a bite with her fork, and said evenly, "Trying to enjoy dinner. You're in my light." The biker chuckled, surprised by her lack of fear. "Ooh, tough one, huh? Don't worry. We can keep you company." The second one slid into the opposite side of her booth without asking, his grin wide and mocking. "Name's Vince, this here's Ray, and you are?" She finally looked up, her eyes sharp and unblinking. "Someone who doesn't need company." Her voice wasn't raised. It wasn't angry. It was measured, clipped, almost military, the kind of tone that shut down excuses before they started. But instead of backing off, the bikers only grinned wider. Ray leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Come on, don't be cold. Two guys like us, one pretty lady like you. We could show you a good time." The waitress froze at the counter, watching nervously. The truckers at the far end of the room shifted uncomfortably but didn't interfere. Nobody wanted to get in the middle of this. The commander placed her fork down neatly, her movements calm, precise. She folded her napkin once, then twice, setting it beside her plate. Then she met their stares again. "You've got about 5 seconds to get up and walk away," she said flatly. The bikers blinked, then burst into laughter. Vince slapped the table, nearly spilling her coffee. "Oh, she's feisty. Look at that glare. You practicing to be a drill sergeant or something?" The commander's gaze didn't waver. Her eyes stayed locked on his, sharp and cold. For the first time, his smile flickered, but Ray leaned in even closer, smirking. "What if we don't walk away? What if we like it right here?" The commander took her coffee in hand, sipping it slowly, as though she hadn't heard him at all. Then she set it down with care, her eyes never leaving his face. "Then you've picked the wrong woman," she said, her voice quiet but heavy as a hammer. The room went silent. The bikers laughed again, but this time their chuckles rang thinner, more forced. They had no idea yet just how wrong they were. The hum of the jukebox filled the silence for a moment, its low tune hanging in the air like a warning no one wanted to voice. The commander sat steady in her booth, her posture upright, her eyes sharp. Across from her, Vince lounged back, smirking, while Ray still leaned over the table, his face far too close. "Wrong woman, huh? Ray said, his grin wide, his voice oily. Lady, you don't scare us. We've dealt with worse than you. The commander tilted her head slightly, studying him as if he were a cadet mouthing off in her classroom. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she lifted her coffee again, sipping it with deliberate calm. Only when she set the mug down did she speak, her voice low and even. You have no idea what worse looks like, Vince laughed, slapping the table so hard that silverware rattled. Oh, listen to her. She's trying to act all tough. Ray, maybe she's some kind of cop. Ray leaned closer, squinting at her jacket. Nah, she ain't, no badge. Probably just a stiff little office lady who thinks she can boss people around. The commander's jaw tightened just slightly, but her expression didn't change. Last chance, she said calmly. Stand up, walk out. Don't make me repeat myself. The regulars at the counter shifted uncomfortably. Everyone could feel the tension building like static in the air before a storm. The waitress glanced at the phone on the wall, her hand hovering as though ready to call for help. But something in the commander's steady tone made her hesitate. Ray smirked. Or what, you gonna call your boyfriend to protect you? He reached forward and tapped the table with one finger, slow and mocking. Maybe you think your big words scare us. The commander's eyes narrowed, and for the first time her voice carried a sharper edge. Words don't scare men. Consequences do. The bikers froze for half a second at the weight behind that sentence. Then Vince chuckled again, though the sound wasn't quite as bold. Lady, you're in the wrong place to be giving speeches. This is our turf. The commander leaned forward now, her arms resting lightly on the table, her posture precise, controlled. She locked eyes with Vince and her tone shifted, calm but commanding, the kind of voice sailors had learned to obey without hesitation. This isn't your turf, she said. This is a diner. These people came here to eat, not to listen to you two puff up like roosters. You're disturbing everyone in this room, and I don't tolerate disruption. The authority in her words caught them off guard. Vince blinked, his smirk faltering just a little. Ray frowned, shifting uncomfortably in his seat, though he tried to cover it by leaning back and crossing his arms. You talk like a school teacher, Ray said, but there was a quiver in his voice. What are you, some kind of wannabe drill sergeant? The commander didn't break eye contact. Commander, she said simply. The word hung heavy in the air. The bikers glanced at each other, uncertain. The regulars looked at her with new eyes, whispers spreading across the counter. She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. Ray forced a laugh, trying to dismiss it. Commander? Commander of what? The Girl Scouts? But Vince shifted uncomfortably now, his smirk gone. He had noticed the way she sat, straight-backed, shoulders squared, every movement precise. He had noticed the scar above her brow, the faint calluses on her hands, the calm in her eyes that no ordinary person carried. Still, pride wouldn't let him back down. He leaned forward again, sneering. Even if you are some kind of Navy lady doesn't mean anything here. You ain't got your soldiers, you ain't got your ship. It's just you. And us. The commander sat back in her seat, unshaken. And that's enough. The silence that followed was suffocating. Her words weren't shouted, but the certainty in them was louder than any yell could be. The bikers laughed again, but this time it was thin, brittle, like glass ready to shatter. Ray reached across the table suddenly, grabbing her napkin and tossing it onto the floor. Pick it up, he ordered, smirking, testing her. Let's see if the Navy still takes orders. Gasps rippled across the diner. The waitress shook her head quickly, whispering, Don't. But the commander raised a hand to stop her. The commander didn't look at the napkin. She didn't even move. Instead, she folded her hands neatly on the table and fixed her gaze on Ray. Her silence pressed harder than words. The longer she stared, the more his grin faltered. You should leave, she said at last, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. Before I stop asking. Her tone wasn't a threat. It was a guarantee. The bikers shifted, their laughter gone now. Pride kept them seated, but unease crept into their movements. They didn't realize it yet, but they had already lost control of the room, and the Navy commander hadn't even begun to fight. The napkin still lay on the floor, its edges curled in a small puddle of spilled coffee. Everyone in the diner seemed to stare at it, waiting to see what would happen next. The two bikers had made their move, daring the woman to bend, to break, to prove she was just another target for their amusement. But the Navy commander didn't move. Her back remained straight, her hands folded neatly on the table, Her eyes locked on the man across from her. She looked more like an officer waiting for a report than a woman sitting in a roadside diner surrounded by trouble. Ray, the one who had tossed the napkin, shifted in his seat. Her stare was too steady, too sharp. It wasn't the look of someone humiliated. It was the look of someone calculating. "Cat got your tongue?" he mocked, but his voice lacked the same confidence as before. "I said, pick it up." The commander leaned forward slowly. The motion wasn't rushed, but it carried weight. She rested her elbows lightly on the table, her gaze boring into his until he finally looked away for a second. "You think this is a game?" she said softly. The diner fell utterly silent. Even the jukebox seemed to pause, the hum of its machine blending into the stillness. The commander's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Her words carried the kind of authority that comes from years of giving orders in places where mistakes meant body bags. You see a woman sitting alone and think that makes me pray. You see a quiet room and think no one will stop you. You're wrong on both counts. Vince snorted, trying to laugh, but the sound was hollow. He leaned back, throwing his arm across the booth, trying to act relaxed. "Lady, we're just having some fun. Don't need to get all serious." The commander's eyes shifted to him. "Fun?" she asked, her tone cold. "Intimidating women. Disturbing people. That's fun to you?" Her words hit like a hammer, and the smirk on Vince's face faltered. He cleared his throat, but Ray leaned in again, refusing to lose face. "You can talk tough all you want," Ray said, sneering. "But out here it's not about speeches. It's about who's stronger." And with that, he reached out suddenly, grabbing her jacket collar between two fingers. The diners gasped. The waitress cried out, "Don't!" But it was too late. The commander moved. Her hand shot up, lightning quick, gripping his wrist with a strength he hadn't expected. In one smooth motion, she twisted his arm outward, forcing his shoulder down toward the table. His grin vanished, replaced by a grimace of pain as his body bent unnaturally. Ray tried to pull free, but her grip was unshakable, precise, the product of endless drills and muscle memory carved from years of combat training. His fingers opened involuntarily, releasing her collar as he groaned. The entire diner froze. No one breathed. The sound of his strained voice filled the silence. "You want stronger?" she asked, her tone still calm, still deadly quiet. "This is stronger." With a sharp twist, she released him. He stumbled backward, clutching his arm, his face red with pain and humiliation. Vince pushed up from the booth in shock, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He pointed a finger at her, his bravado cracking. What the hell are you?" The commander turned her gaze on him, her expression unreadable. "Someone you don't want to know," she said. Her words hit harder than any shout could have. Ray cursed under his breath, shaking his wrist, trying to mask the pain with a scowl. He turned to his friend, muttering, "She's bluffing. Just got lucky." But the diners had seen the truth. That move wasn't luck. It wasn't clumsy or desperate. It was practiced, efficient, controlled. It was the kind of maneuver that came from someone who had trained to dismantle men twice her size. Vince tried to recover his confidence. He leaned forward, sneering again, though his eyes darted nervously toward her hands. "So you know a trick or two?" "Doesn't mean anything. Out here, you're still outnumbered." The commander's lips curved, not into a smile, but into something sharper. "Outnumbered?" she repeated. "I've led sailors through storms at sea. I've commanded men in firefights where the odds were 100 to 1. Two loud bikers don't scare me." Her voice carried across the room, firm and unwavering. The truckers at the counter exchanged glances, whispering. One muttered, "She's military." You can hear it in her tone. The bikers stiffened, caught between pride and fear. Their instincts told them to back down, but their egos screamed to push further. Ray, still rubbing his wrist, spat on the floor. "You think you can just talk down to us? We don't take orders from you." The commander leaned back in her booth, her posture once again calm, composed. She folded her napkin neatly and placed it on the table. "I'm not giving you orders," she said. "I'm giving you a choice. Walk out the door now or find out what happens when I stop holding back." Her words sliced through the tension like a blade. The bikers froze, their bravado cracking further. They had wanted a victim. What they had found was a Navy commander who had stared down real danger and lived to tell it. And though they didn't know it yet, the worst was still to come. The diner blurred around her for a moment. The bikers' faces, the spilled coffee on the floor, the hush of frightened customers. The commander's eyes remained locked on the men in front of her, but her mind had slipped back into places she thought she'd left behind. The first memory came fast, as sharp as a breaking wave. She was on the deck of a ship, the ocean heaving beneath her boots, salt spray stinging her face. The storm had been fierce that night, winds howling, waves towering higher than houses. Her sailors were young, their eyes wide with fear as lightning split the sky. Radios crackled, voices panicked, but she had stood tall, shouting orders over the roar, her voice carrying through the chaos. She remembered gripping the railing, her knuckles white, and yelling, "Steady her bow! Keep formation! Trust your training!" And they had listened. They had survived because she never broke. That same voice, sharp, commanding, certain, was the one now cutting through the quiet of the diner. Her second memory struck harder. A desert, dry and endless, the sun beating down with cruel intensity. She was in uniform then, helmet heavy on her head, sand scratching against her face as gunfire cracked in the distance. Her squad was pinned down behind a crumbling wall, bullets chipping away at stone. Young men shouted in fear. Radio calls begged for backup that wouldn't come in time. She had made the call herself, flanking with 2 sailors, leading them through the storm of fire. She remembered sprinting low, her rifle steady, her eyes fixed on the threat. She had moved without hesitation, cutting through the enemy line like a blade. The fight ended with silence, and her sailors had looked at her with a mixture of awe and relief. She had stared at them back then, sweat dripping, lungs burning, and realized she was more than just their commander. She was the one who stood when others faltered. The one who didn't bend. The one who carried them through. Back in the diner, she blinked once, slow and deliberate. Her gaze was unshaken. Ray shifted under her stare, his bravado wearing thin. Vince licked his lips nervously, the weight of her composure gnawing at him. But her memories weren't finished. She saw the sea again. Not a storm this time, but the pitch-black stillness of night. A pirate skiff had appeared on the radar, closing in fast. She had led the intercept herself, boarding under cover of darkness. Knives glinted, voices shouted in foreign tongues, but she had been faster, sharper. She remembered the moment she disarmed a man twice her size. Her blade pressed against his throat before he even knew she had moved. She remembered his eyes, shocked, afraid, not unlike the biker's eyes now. That memory bled into another, standing before a row of coffins draped in flags. Men and women she had commanded buried because war was cruel and merciless. She had stood at attention, her salute sharp, her jaw tight, her heart heavy. She had promised herself then that she would carry their strength with her, that she would never let arrogance, weakness, or cruelty dishonor what they had given. And now, sitting in this diner, facing 2 loud, careless men who thought intimidation was power, she realized how pitiful they looked compared to the enemies she had faced, the storms she had weathered and the battles she had survived. She exhaled slowly, returning to the present. The diner was silent. The customer stared, sensing something in her stillness. Something bigger than the moment. Something forged far from here, in fire and salt and blood. She leaned forward, her voice steady, calm, but carrying the weight of oceans and deserts and every battlefield she had endured. "You think this is strength?" she asked, her tone cutting into them. 2 men bullying strangers in a diner? Let me tell you what strength looks like. Strength is standing when the sea wants to throw you overboard. Strength is keeping 20 men alive under fire when everything around you is falling apart. Strength is making the hard call, sending people into danger and living with it. Her words settled heavily across the room. Ray swallowed, his smirk gone, his hand still rubbing the wrist she had twisted earlier. Vince shifted uneasily, glancing at the door, suddenly less eager to sit so close to her. The commander's eyes narrowed. "I've faced storms that would sink ships. I've faced men who wanted me dead. And I'm still here. You're nothing but noise." The silence that followed was crushing. No one dared to move. The waitress's hand shook as she wiped the counter, her eyes fixed on the commander as if seeing her in a new light. The truckers at the back exchanged looks, one muttering under his breath, "She's the real deal." Under his breath, "She's the real deal." The bikers had wanted to expose weakness. Instead, they had awakened memories of a warrior who had lived through hell. And the longer they sat under her gaze, the more they realized they had chosen the wrong woman. The napkin on the floor had been forgotten. The half-spilled coffee had dried into a dark stain. But the tension in the diner was thicker than ever. The 2 bikers sat across from the Navy commander, their bravado cracking like glass under pressure. Around them, every customer stayed silent, forks frozen halfway to mouths, eyes fixed on the scene unfolding like a drama no one had bought tickets for, but no one dared to miss. Ray leaned back in his chair, his face flushed red from anger and the sting of humiliation. He rubbed the wrist she had twisted earlier, glaring at her as though his stare alone could burn through her calm composure. Vince tried to hide his unease with a smirk, but the twitch in his jaw betrayed him. They had expected her to be scared. Instead, she had sat still, unmoved, commanding the room without raising her voice. And that silence, that unshakable calm, infuriated them more than any insult could have. "Enough of this," Ray growled, his voice tight with frustration. "You think you're better than us? You think just 'cause you talk fancy we're supposed to back down?" The commander said nothing. She simply looked at him, her gaze steady, controlled. Ray's anger boiled over. He pushed up from the booth, his chair scraping loudly across the linoleum floor. In one swift, reckless motion, he reached across the table and grabbed her arm. His fingers closed around her jacket sleeve, rough and demanding, as he sneered, "Let's see how tough you really are." The entire diner gasped. The waitress cried out, "Stop!" but her voice cracked with fear. And then the commander moved. Her body reacted faster than thought, the way years of training conditioned her to respond when danger struck. Her hand snapped up, clamping onto his wrist with a grip like iron. In a fluid twist, she rotated his arm outward, pulling him forward off balance. His sneer vanished, replaced with shock as his shoulder buckled under the pressure. The motion was precise, efficient. No wasted effort, no hesitation. Within a heartbeat, Ray's face slammed against the tabletop, his arm pinned painfully behind his back. The sound of his groan filled the diner, mingling with the stunned silence of onlookers. Coffee cups trembled on saucers. A child peeked over a booth seat, wide-eyed as though watching a scene out of a movie. Ray struggled, but her grip tightened, her leverage perfect. He was bigger, stronger, heavier, but strength meant nothing against skill honed in years of hand-to-hand drills on steel decks and combat zones. She leaned close, her voice low, calm, dangerous. "Rule number 1, never put your hands on me." Vince shot to his feet, his chair toppling behind him. "Let him go," he barked, though his voice cracked with uncertainty. He took a step forward, fists clenched. The commander didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Ray, whose face was pressed against the cold surface of the table. With a sharp push, she released him, sending him stumbling back, clutching his twisted arm and groaning in pain. She straightened, adjusting her jacket sleeve as though nothing had happened. Her movements were clean, composed, almost casual, but her eyes burned with authority. "You wanted to see tough?" she said, her voice carrying across the diner. That was restraint. The word sliced through the silence like a blade. Vince hesitated, his fists trembling at his sides. He had just watched his friend, a man twice her size, thrown down in seconds. The arrogance in his smirk was gone now, replaced with something closer to fear, but his pride pushed him forward anyway. "You'll pay for that," he hissed, though his eyes darted nervously. "Nobody does that to us." The commander turned her gaze on him, steady and unblinking. "Then you haven't met the right people." Vince froze. There was no shouting in her tone, no swagger, no bluff, just cold certainty. Around the room, whispers rippled through the diner. One trucker leaned toward another, muttering, "She's trained. Did you see how fast she moved?" Another nodded. "Military. Has to be." The waitress stood behind the counter, her hand over her mouth, staring at the commander as though seeing her for the first time. Ray sat slumped in the booth, still rubbing his arm, his eyes burning with rage but clouded with hesitation. His pride wanted revenge, but his body remembered the pain. Vince hovered uncertainly, caught between stepping forward and stepping back. The commander leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. "You wanted to test me. You got your answer. Now leave." Her words landed like an order on a parade ground, but pride is stubborn. Ray slammed his fist on the table, standing shakily. "We're not done," he growled, though his voice lacked conviction. "Nobody embarrasses us like this." The commander's gaze hardened. "Then your education is just beginning." The room froze again, the weight of her words pressing down like a storm rolling in. This was no ordinary woman. And the bikers were only now realizing that they had poked a predator. The diner was silent except for the ragged breathing of Ray, who still clutched his twisted arm. Vince stood tense a few feet away, fists clenched but unmoving. Around them, customers sat frozen, watching a scene they'd never forget. The Navy commander didn't look ruffled. Her jacket was smooth, her hands steady, her breathing calm. She looked like someone who had already calculated the outcome, and knew it was hers. Ray spat on the floor, his face red with humiliation. "You think you're better than us just because you got lucky?" The commander's gaze shifted to him, and for the first time she allowed herself a small, sharp smile. "Luck has nothing to do with it. That was training, precision, control. 3 things you wouldn't understand." Vince barked a laugh, though it was strained. "Training? What are you, some kind of martial arts teacher? Some retired cop?" The commander leaned back in her booth, her posture perfect, her eyes burning with cold confidence. She didn't rush. She didn't flinch. She simply spoke, and her words carried like steel across the diner. "I am Commander Elizabeth Hale, United States Navy. I've led men and women into storms at sea that would sink ships. I've commanded units in firefights where the air itself burned with gunfire. I've stared down pirates, insurgents, and enemies who didn't think I'd live to see another sunrise. And I'm still here." Her voice didn't rise, but the diner shook with the weight of it. "You," she continued, her tone sharp, "you're 2 loud boys in leather jackets who think bullying makes you strong. You've never seen real strength. You've never watched men drown and still had to keep fighting. You've never carried the weight of decisions that mean life or death for dozens of people. You have no idea what kind of person you just decided to provoke." The bikers froze. The name, the rank, the certainty in her tone. None of it sounded like bluff. One of the truckers at the counter muttered, "Commander, my God." His friend nodded, whispering, "Explains everything. The way she moves. The way she talks." The waitress stood with her hands clasped tight, her eyes wide. She didn't need convincing. She had already seen the truth in the way the woman had put Ray on the floor in seconds. Ray tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. "So what? Navy or not, you're sitting in a diner, same as us. You don't have your ship. You don't have your soldiers. You don't scare me." The commander's eyes narrowed, her face hardening. "Then you're dumber than I thought." She leaned forward, her tone dropping lower, colder. "Do you know what a commander is, Ray? It's someone who leads when everyone else wants to hide. Someone who doesn't get the option of fear. Someone who carries responsibility so heavy it could crush a weaker person in a day. You think my strength is in a ship or a rank? No, my strength is here." She tapped her temple with one finger. "And here." Her hand shifted to her chest. The words hit him harder than her wrist lock had. His bravado cracked further. His hands shook at his sides. Vince tried to recover. "Talk all you want. Doesn't change the fact you're outnumbered." The commander chuckled once, a low sound that sent a chill through the room. "Outnumbered?" She shook her head. "I've been outnumbered my entire career. I've faced 30 men with rifles while I had a single sidearm. I've walked into storms where even the ocean itself was my enemy. You think 2 bikers make me nervous? You think numbers are what win battles? No, skill wins battles. Discipline wins wars." Her words dropped like thunder, each syllable deliberate, leaving no space for rebuttal. Ray's shoulders slumped. Vince shifted, suddenly less sure of himself. The crowd watched them crumble under the weight of her authority. The commander's voice sharpened again. "You picked the wrong person tonight. You thought you saw weakness. You thought you saw someone alone. But let me make this very clear. You are alive right now only because I'm choosing to let you walk away. I've killed men tougher than you. I've buried men braver than you. And I've done it without hesitation." The silence that followed was suffocating. Every customer felt the truth in her words. They weren't boasts. They weren't threats. They were facts. Cold, sharp facts delivered by a woman who had lived them. Vince's fists lowered slowly. His eyes darted to the door. Ray stared at the floor, his anger crumbling into shame. The commander sat back again, her voice soft but deadly. "You've got one choice left. Leave this diner, or I remind you what happens when you ignore orders." Her eyes locked on them both, unblinking. And for the first time since walking in, the bikers realized they weren't in control. Weren't in control. They had never been. From the moment they set eyes on her, they had been standing in the shadow of someone who lived in a world they couldn't imagine. The wrong woman, the wrong target, the wrong night. The silence in the diner was so thick it felt alive. Every customer, truckers, couples, even the waitress, watched the 2 bikers with wide eyes. The weight of the commander's words still hung in the air like smoke after gunfire. Ray's chest rose and fell quickly, his anger fighting against the sting of humiliation. He had always been the loudest in every room, the one people flinched away from. But tonight, standing across from this calm woman in a booth, his fists shaking, he felt small. Vince tried to smirk, tried to summon the swagger that usually carried him through tense moments. But the commander's stare cut straight through him. It wasn't a glare of rage, but one of absolute control, like she was already 10 steps ahead and he was nothing more than a pawn in her game. Finally, Ray broke the silence, his voice hoarse. You don't scare me." The commander tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing. "Yes, I do, and that scares you more than you want to admit." The words struck deep. Ray's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. He couldn't. Vince shifted, his shoulders sagging, his hands dropping from fists to trembling fingers. "Look, maybe we went too far," he muttered. His tone lacked the sharpness it had carried earlier. It was the voice of someone realizing the ground beneath his feet was gone. The commander's lips curved into something sharp. Not a smile, but a verdict. "Maybe," she repeated, her voice calm but slicing. "You call harassment fun. You spill drinks, grab arms, throw punches at strangers. And when it turns against you, you call it a mistake?" Her tone was deadly quiet, but it carried more weight than a shout ever could. The truckers at the counter exchanged looks. One muttered under his breath, "She's reading them their last rites." Ray's face flushed. He opened his mouth, but the commander raised a hand, silencing him. "Don't speak, listen, because tonight you were given a lesson. And I want you to remember every word of it." Her eyes locked on Vince first. "You think numbers make you strong. But strength isn't about who's beside you. It's about who you are when you stand alone. I've stood alone in storms with death on every side, and I survived. You crumble the second someone pushes back." Vince lowered his eyes, his face pale. Then her gaze shifted to Ray. Her voice hardened. "And you think violence makes you powerful. You think grabbing someone proves control. All it proves is weakness. Real power isn't in breaking things. Real power is in knowing when you could, and choosing not to." Ray swallowed hard, his bravado gone. He looked like a boy, not a man, his shoulders sagging under the weight of her words. The commander straightened, her posture sharp. Her voice carried now, filling the diner like the crack of a ship's bell at dawn. "You picked the wrong person tonight, and the only reason you're walking out of here alive is because I don't waste my strength on men like you." Gasps rippled through the room. The child at the back booth peeked up from behind his father's arm, his eyes wide. He didn't look at the bikers. He looked at her with awe. Ray stammered, his voice cracking. We didn't know who you were." The commander's gaze sharpened, her tone dropping lower, colder. "That's the problem. You never know. You look at someone and see what you want to see. Weakness, prey, a target. But you don't know their story. You don't know their scars. You don't know what storms they've survived." She leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but razor sharp. "So remember this night. Remember the woman you mocked. Remember how close you came to crossing a line you would never come back from." The bikers stood frozen, their eyes locked on hers. For the first time in their lives, they looked like men who had lost not just a fight, but the illusion of power they'd clung to for years. The waitress stepped forward now, her voice shaking but stronger than before. "You boys heard her. Leave, before she decides you've overstayed your welcome." Vince nodded quickly, muttering something close to an apology. He backed toward the door, his boots heavy against the floor. Ray lingered, his pride still clinging to him like a ragged coat. But when the commander's eyes locked on him again, unblinking, he flinched and followed Vince. The door creaked open, the night air rushing in. The bell above jingled softly as they stepped out, shadows swallowed by the darkness beyond the neon lights. Inside, silence reigned for a long moment. Every person in the diner seemed to exhale at once. The storm had passed, but the memory of it clung to the air like smoke. The commander sat back slowly, her hands returning to her coffee mug. She lifted it, took a calm sip, and set it down again. To her, it was over. But for the bikers, for the customers, for the waitress, they would carry this night for the rest of their lives. The bell above the diner door jingled once, then twice as the two bikers disappeared into the dark. Their boots pounded across the pavement, their muttered curses muffled by the roar of their engines sputtering to life. Moments later, the growl of motorcycles faded down the highway, swallowed by the endless night. Inside, the diner remained still. For a long, heavy moment, no one spoke. It was as if every person in the room was holding their breath, waiting to be sure the storm had truly passed. Forks lay untouched on plates. Coffee sat cooling in mugs. The air smelled faintly of grease, smoke, and the sharp tang of adrenaline. At the center of it all, Commander Elizabeth Hale sat in her booth, calm as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. Her posture was straight, her jacket smooth, her hands folded neatly on the table. She didn't revel in victory. She didn't smile at her opponent's retreat. To her, this wasn't triumph. It was just another test, one she had passed the same way she always did, with discipline and control. The waitress was the first to break the silence. She stepped out from behind the counter, her hands still trembling, though her voice carried a mix of awe and gratitude. "Ma'am," she said softly, "I don't know how you stayed so calm. Most folks would have been terrified." The commander turned her head slightly, meeting the woman's eyes. "Fear isn't the enemy," she said evenly. "Losing control is?" The word settled over the waitress like a truth she hadn't known she needed. She nodded slowly, pressing a hand to her chest. One of the truckers at the counter cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough but respectful, "I've been in bar brawls, seen my share of tough men. I've never seen anybody shut someone down like that." "You didn't even raise your voice." The commander gave a small shrug. "When you've commanded in places where shouting gets lost in the chaos, you learn that calm carries further." The trucker nodded, impressed. "Well, I'll be telling this story for years." In the back booth, the little boy who had peeked out earlier climbed onto his seat again, his eyes wide with wonder. "Daddy," he whispered loud enough for others to hear. "Was she a superhero?" His father smiled faintly, ruffling the boy's hair. "No, son," he said. "She's something real." "That's even better." The commander's eyes softened for just a moment as she caught the boy's gaze. She gave him a small nod, almost a smile. It wasn't warm in the way ordinary people smiled, but it carried reassurance, the kind a soldier might give a civilian after danger had passed. The boy's grin widened, as though he had just been given a secret badge of courage. The commander reached for her coffee, drained the last sip, and set the mug down with precise care. She slid out of the booth, collected her purse, and walked toward the counter with measured steps. She placed a few bills on the counter, more than enough to cover her meal, more than enough to replace the broken mug from earlier. The waitress started to protest. "You don't have to." "I do," the commander interrupted gently. "Because dignity means paying for what's yours no matter what else happens." The waitress swallowed, her eyes glistening. "Thank you, and thank you for standing up to them." The commander gave a curt nod. "I didn't stand up for myself. I stood up for everyone in this room. Remember that." Her words carried weight, echoing through the quiet like a final lesson. She turned toward the door, her boots clicking against the floor. The neon sign outside painted her silhouette red as she paused in the doorway. She looked back once, sweeping her gaze across the diners who still sat in awe. "Strength isn't about being the loudest in the room," she said. Her voice was steady, deliberate. "It's about being the one who doesn't break when it matters most." And with that, she pushed the door open. The night air drifted in, cool and sharp. She stepped outside, her figure framed for a moment in the glow of neon before vanishing into the darkness. The bell jingled one final time, then fell silent. Inside, the diner slowly came back to life. Conversations restarted in hushed tones. Forks clinked against plates again, but the atmosphere had changed. Every person there carried the weight of what they had seen, as though they had witnessed not just a fight but a lesson. The truckers shook their heads, muttering about courage and discipline. The waitress wiped the counter, her hands steadier now, her spirit lifted, and the little boy whispered to his father again, "I want to be like her." His father smiled, his eyes lingering on the empty doorway. "Then remember her words, son. Strength isn't loud." And though Commander Elizabeth Hale was gone, rolling down the dark highway toward whatever destination waited next, the truth remained behind her. Two bikers had walked into a diner thinking they owned the room. They left broken, silent, and ashamed, and every witness in that diner knew they had seen something unforgettable. The night two men picked on the wrong Navy commander.